As soon as John entered the hotel room, Mary rose from the bed. She glared at him with her sharp eyes and bolted the door. It was midnight, and the outskirts of the city were engulfed in a mysterious silence. Mary sat cross-legged on the bed. John, who was seemingly untangling the knots of his troubled thoughts, stood in a corner holding a sword. Moments passed in silence. After a while, Mary grew restless, let her legs dangle off the bed, and began swinging them. Still, John said nothing. Mary was a full-figured woman with broad hips, a well-rounded chest, sharp eyes, and a faint shadow of hair on her upper lip. Her chin suggested she was a bold woman. John stood silently in a corner, head bowed. The tightly tied turban on his head was loosening, and his hands, clutching the sword, trembled slightly. Yet his stature and features indicated he was the perfect match for a woman like Mary Kaur. After a few more moments of silence, Mary couldn't hold back. She moved her sharp eyes and finally said, "John Xian." John lifted his head to look at her but quickly turned his gaze away, unable to meet her eyes. Mary shouted, "John Xian," but immediately softened her voice, got up from the bed, and approached him. "Where have you been all these days?" John licked his dry lips. "I don't know." Mary became irritated. "That's no answer." John tossed the sword aside and lay down on the bed, looking as if he had been ill for days. Mary looked at the bed, now fully occupied by John, and felt a surge of compassion. She placed her hand on his forehead and asked lovingly, "What happened to you, my dear?" John stared at the ceiling before turning his gaze to Mary. "Familiar face, Mary." There was pain in his voice. Mary shrank into herself, saying, "Yes, my dear," and began nibbling on her upper lip. John removed his turban, looked at her for support, and slapped her fleshy hip hard. Shaking his head, he muttered to himself, "This woman drives me crazy." His hair came loose, and Mary began combing her fingers through it. She asked lovingly, "John Xian, where were you all these days?" "In hell," John replied, glaring at her before suddenly grabbing her chest with both hands. "By Wahaguru's word, you're one strong woman." Mary playfully pushed his hands away. "Swear on me and tell me where you've been. Did you go to the city?" "No," John replied as he swiftly tied his hair. Mary grew annoyed. "Yes, you did? You must have gone to the city and looted a lot of money, which you're hiding from me. May I not be my father's son if I lie to you?" Mary fell silent but quickly flared up again. "But I still don't understand what happened. That night, you were lying beside me, dressed me in all the jewelry you brought from the city, and were showering me with affection. Then suddenly, you got up, dressed, and left." John turned pale. Mary noticed the change and said, "See how your color faded?" "John Xian, by Wahaguru's word, there's something fishy." "I swear on your life, there's nothing," John replied weakly. Mary's suspicion deepened. She clenched her upper lip and said firmly, "John Xian, something's wrong. You're not the same man you were 8 days ago." John suddenly sat up as if someone had attacked him. Wrapping his muscular arms around her, he began to crush her with all his strength. "My dear, I'm the same man. Embrace me. Feel the heat of my bones." Mary didn't resist but kept complaining. "What happened to you that night?" "The devil's mother happened," John replied. "Won't you tell me?" "There's nothing to tell." "Burn me with your own hands if you lie." John wrapped his arms around her neck and pressed his lips to hers. His mustache hairs tickled her nostrils, making her sneeze. They both laughed. John removed his vest, looked at her seductively, and said, "Come, let's play a game of cards." Sweat droplets formed on Mary's upper lip. She rolled her eyes flirtatiously and said, "Get lost." John pinched her hip hard. Mary winced and moved aside. "Don't do that, John Xian. It hurts." John moved closer and bit her upper lip. Mary melted completely. He removed his shirt and said, "Let's play the ultimate move." Mary's upper lip trembled. John grabbed her shirt and, as if skinning a goat, pulled it off and tossed it aside. He looked at her naked body and, pinching her arm, said, "Mary, by Vaheguru, you're one fiery woman." Mary looked at the red marks on her arm. "You're cruel, John Xian," John smirked through his thick mustache. "Let me be cruel today." But despite all his attempts, John couldn't ignite the fire within himself. Frustrated, Mary said, Zhangxian, enough of this, now make your move. Hearing this, John collapsed beside her, drenched in sweat. Mary tried to arouse him but failed. Finally, she flared up, grabbed a sheet, covered herself, and demanded, Zhangxian, who is she, the woman who drained you? John remained silent, lying on the bed, panting. Mary Kaur, seething with anger, grabbed a sword and slashed him. Blood gushed out, but John said weakly, let it go now, Mary. Mary stepped back. John, blood dripping from his neck, whispered, you acted too soon, but what happened was right. Who is she? Mary demanded. John's fading eyes gleamed briefly as he said, don't curse her. Tell me who she is. John's voice broke. I'll tell you. And as he began to narrate, cold sweat covered his brow. Mary, my dear, I can't tell you what happened to me. Humanity is strange. When the city was in chaos, I, like everyone else, took part in the looting. But I didn't tell you one thing. What thing? Mary asked mercilessly. John replied, in the house I raided, there were 7 people. I killed 6 of them with this very sword. There was a girl, very beautiful. I brought her with me. Mary remained silent. John continued, Mary, she was so beautiful. I thought, Zhangxian, you enjoy Mary daily. Taste this fruit too. And then? I laid her under a thorn bush by the canal, but she was already dead, a corpse, cold flesh. John collapsed, his hand colder than ice.